Hello. I wanted to talk a little bit about the book that I wrote back in 2023 when I first published it as an indie author. In fact, this is December now. And in December, in fact, on December 26th, 2014, a cousin and myself were very bored with the idea of staying in England for New Year's Eve. And we thought, why don't we go somewhere else to spend New Year's Eve? And almost synergistically, we both said Cuba. Neither of us had ever been to Cuba before, but I have been wanting to go to Cuba for a very, very long time. So we thought, right, let's go to Cuba. And we did. We booked our flights. We had to go via Air France to Paris, which is very nice, and from Paris on to Havana. If any of you have been to Cuba, and I have met many who have, they've absolutely loved the island. It's one of the largest islands in the Caribbean. In fact, it is the biggest island in the Caribbean. It is not like any of the other Caribbean islands I've ever been to. I haven't been to many, but I've been to a few. And the thought of going to Cuba, where for me, it was, I would say, almost a cinematic experience, because I'd seen many movies set in Cuba back in the 1950s, like The Man from Havana with Alec Guinness as an example. That was much earlier. And I loved the feeling that I saw about Cuba, all about, the long-finned American cars, the music, the salsa, the dancing, the mixed race people, and being of mixed race myself, I feel very comfortable in that environment. So my cousin and I arrived in Havana on the 26th of December, 2014. We just came to go for a holiday, nothing more than that. My mother had died. My husband and I had split up, or my partner and I had split up. And I was in business and feeling just a little bit tarnished by the whole thing. And so going to somewhere brand new, something completely different to where I'd always been traveling, was going to be a very exciting experience. So we arrived in Havana. We stood at the airport, and both of us were grinning like children, because what we were feeling about standing at the airport was a sense of traveling back in time. Havana Airport is in no way glamorous. It's very down to earth. In fact, it reminded us very much of somewhere like Delhi, India, where my cousin and I originated from. So we like this feeling of nothing flashy, nothing predictable, a quietness. Our guide approached us very quiet, very reserved. There was no hustling about, ma'am, do you want a taxi to go here? Ma'am, do you want to go to a taxi there? Nothing like that at all. It had this real sense of calm. Well, that's what we experienced. Maybe the people of Havana think differently. Anyway, we arrived and we stayed in Cuba for approximately 2 weeks. We stayed in Havana for 5 days and we spent New Year's Eve there. Had a really great time. Nothing like we'd expected. In fact, totally unexpected, but we loved it. And so we had this Cuban experience full of music, full of richness of architecture. Havana was like going back to either Cordoba or Granada or Sevilla itself. The architecture looks completely Spanish, but the churches, the beautiful, magnificent hotels that you cannot imagine. But if you transport yourself back to the 1950s when Havana and Cuba was a thriving country, and you can imagine the kind of parties and social life that was lived in Havana, well, inside the hotels, you can imagine what life was like back in the days when Havana or Cuba was doing really well for itself. Anyway, we had a wonderful holiday, but certain things began to happen on the holiday that were unexpected. And I'm not going to tell you too much, because many years later, in fact, in 2021, I decided to write a book about Cuba, a memoir. Most of it, the memoir is based on fact, but there are other parts of it that are not quite factual. So it has become a semi-fiction. But the story itself is a story that I would say many people have experienced in Cuba, in various other parts of the world. I suppose in a way, the memoir becomes a little bit like a cautionary tale. Because my feeling is that when you travel anywhere, when you go anywhere, if you're in a very deeply distressed emotional state, your mind becomes altered. Your reactions are different. You make decisions that you would normally not make. And out in Cuba, the protagonist of the story begins to make decisions that were out of character, decisions that led her down pathways that she did not even begin to dream she would take. And the outcome of the story is totally unexpected and left her in a state of complete numbness. But in between all of that, the protagonist got to know a country deeply, to get to know the country, to deeply get to know the people, to deeply begin to understand their customs and get a real sense of what Cuba, the island, is like. So if you've never been to Cuba and you'd like to find out a lot more about it, Thank You for the Kiss, my memoir, will give you a very, very good, deep understanding of what this Caribbean island is like. In fact, I was sent a review, or I received a review yesterday that took me by surprise. And I'd like to just read a little bit so that gives you a sense of what the story is possibly like, maybe even for you, because each reader will interpret the story differently. And the reader said, Thank You for the Kiss by Beth Jordan is a gripping and deeply personal memoir that pulls you in from the very first page. Set in the hauntingly beautiful yet time-frozen landscape of Cuba, the story unfolds with a vivid sense of place, an island where paradise and disillusionment coexist side by side. That is a feeling I had all the time. It was a paradise of waiting. I often found people just standing in a corner, sitting on a stone step, just waiting. Jordan's journey is emotional, unpredictable, and at times astonishing. As a series of events spirals out of control, she and the central figures in her life find themselves drawn into what she describes as a Dantesque inferno. The tension builds steadily, leaving readers wanting to shout warnings as they watch choices, some hopeful, some naive, lead to consequences no one could have foreseen. What makes the memoir stand out is its raw honesty. Jordan writes with raw clarity and an unflinching eye for emotional truth. Some readers will recognize their own vulnerabilities in her story. Others will shake their heads in disbelief at how quickly circumstances can shift. Either way, this is a memoir that lingers. So if you enjoy real life stories or stories based on real life, filled with atmosphere, emotional depth, and a sense of cautionary intrigue, Thank You for the Kiss is a compelling and unforgettable read, even if I may say so myself. And as the author of that story, I feel very blessed that I had the opportunity to be able to express an event that took place in a way that I would never have believed I could actually do that. So if you would like to read the story, it's the book, Thank You for the Kiss. It is available on Amazon, or it is available from my website on www.bethjordanauthorphotographer.com. On my website are many photos of Havana and various parts of Cuba that I had visited. I do hope you like the photos. I do hope you like the book when you get a chance to read it. And when you do get a chance to read it, please do drop a review on Amazon. It makes a big difference for authors to have reviews by readers. It doesn't have to be a long review, just a couple of sentences, but it means a great deal to the author to know that the reader was touched in some way by the story that they have told. So please do take the opportunity to either go to Amazon or go to my website and have a look and a read and let us know, or let me know, what you think of the story. Thank you very much. And have a very happy Christmas. And it makes a great gift. Bye for now.